Here on LBC, you've been ringing in all day with your stories of how local schools have been impacted by the concrete crisis. And I played a few of them to the Schools Minister, Nick Gibb.
I mean, I had young children. If it rained, they jumped up and moved all the display because they knew that's where the rain came in.
So we found out in, I teach in kind of East London, on the border of East London and Essex, and we found out about the rack in kind of February, March, just after the teacher strike. So about 50% of our schools closed for about 2 weeks. So those children had to be taught online again. And then once they come back, those certain rooms are forbidden. So the DfE came in and did an inspection and said, no, absolutely no one's allowed in that room. Music, can't teach in music because RE has to come and teach there. Maths has to go and teach in this block. This year group can't come in because this, it's just a logistical nightmare.
One way that they got around the leaking and drafty concrete was to put cladding on top of them. So what you've now got is schools that on the outside look quite nice. They still have all of the problems, probably. They're very likely to still have those problems. They're very much that era. And now they're covered with cladding.
Nick, you are Schools Minister. What do you feel when you hear those kind of voices?
Well, it's frustrating that we have school buildings, 22,000 schools, 65,000 school buildings, and these were built between the 1950s and the 1990s using what I would regard as a substandard product.
Yes,
that
it's more than embarrassing, isn't it? It's pretty shameful for a country like Britain to have so many schools in this condition.
Yes, and it's not just in this country either. Don't forget, these are eras when this kind of material was acceptable. We learned a lot from the mid-1990s about the use of rack, and we've been very proactive. There was a collapse of a school in 2018. We issued very clear guidance and warnings to those organisations that are responsible for our school buildings, the local authorities and the trusts and the dioceses, pointing out the danger of rack, how to identify it, what to do to monitor it. And that work, and plus this survey that we sent out in March 2022, enabled us to identify where the rack is and action. And these schools that you've just heard from, we know that where the rack is, and it's in about 156 schools so far we've identified out of 22,000 schools in the country, and we're taking action to mitigate it to ensure that the schools are safe.
When did you first hear about rack?
I first heard about it when I came back into office in October last year, and we have a minister already in place there, the Minister for the School System, Diana Barron, who's doing a brilliant job in pushing this issue and identifying rack.
Well, Nick, you say a brilliant job, and yet this has been a problem that architects and structural surveyors and many other experts have been warning about for a very, very long time indeed, and yet nothing has been done. We heard today from the former Permanent Secretary that when he was Chancellor, Rishi Sunak halved the budget for replacing schools that needed to be replaced. This is, frankly, on your watch collectively.
No, that's not true. Nothing has been done. From 2018 onwards...
Well, I didn't say nothing. I said not nearly enough.
Well, I don't agree with that either. We've issued very clear guidance to schools about how to identify and monitor rack. We've sent out the questionnaires, I've said, in March 2022. We have chased for responses. We've had 95% responses from responsible bodies identifying either they don't have rack or confirming that they do, and then we send in surveyors to assess the quality. And last week we changed the guidance to say it doesn't matter what the quality of the rack is, whether it's critical or not. Whatever state it's in, we need to take those rooms out.
Yeah, this is last week. This is days before thousands and thousands of school children are about to go back to school. The same school children who had their education so badly disrupted by the pandemic. They've had a really tough time already, and suddenly, right at the last minute, they're told they can't go to school, and we don't even know yet which schools are affected. Well, this feels like kind of incompetent crisis management.
No, whenever the evidence came to light, we would have immediately told schools. And that's what happened in the summer. We knew the evidence was there. We had to announce it as soon as we had that evidence confirmed, and we knew what and the mitigations put in place. This could have been in November. Then it would have been in the middle of the term time. You cannot sit on this evidence and just wait till it's convenient to announce it. So we had to announce it straight away. In terms of the assertions made by Jonathan Slater, look, we've been having different school building programs: the Priority Schools Building Program, the Priority School Building Program 2, the School Rebuilding Program now. It's about 50 a year throughout that period 260
But
schools.
clearly not nearly enough. We're going to have to knock down and rebuild a huge number of schools now. Is there a budget for that?
There is, of course, there's a massive capital budget. We have a budget for 500 rebuilds just from 2020 to 2030. And some of those schools already identified in that 500 are schools that we have identified as having RAC. And we will rebuild those schools that are in the worst condition. The other thing we have done since 2010 is we have conducted 2 full surveys of all 22,000 schools up and down the country to assess the quality of their school building. This has never been done before. And from that
survey... So why this sense of last-minute panic, this week and last week?
Because over the summer, we became aware of 2 particular schools. We sent our engineers in to get more evidence. And even as late as last week, one of those schools came to our attention. We sent in engineers. The evidence was compelling that we had to change our advice. It's a difficult decision, but the Secretary of State, all the ministers, and the senior civil servants believe very strongly that you cannot risk children's lives. So however inconvenient it is, I do understand the frustration of those teachers and of parents, but we cannot put children's lives at risk when we have this new evidence about RAC that previously was identified as low risk. Now we know there's no such thing as low risk RAC, that it has to be taken out of use wherever it's been confirmed in school buildings.
And this is the same Secretary of State, to be clear, who said earlier on today, does anyone ever say, you know what, you've done a bleep, 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 good job, because everyone else has sat on their bleep, bleep, bleep and done nothing? No signs of that? No. Who was she talking about? Was she talking about you? You've been there for a long time.
She was not talking about me. She was
talking about Michael Gove or Gavin Williamson. She must have been talking about colleagues.
She was frustrated about the lack of acknowledgement of the work the civil servants have been doing for years in identifying this RAC. She is also frustrated.
I'm sorry, she was talking about people who weren't doing things.
I'll come to that. So we've had 95% of the responses back from the responsible bodies, those bodies, local authorities, dioceses, trusts, who are actually legally and practically responsible for the building. But we've not had 5% back, and it's that she was frustrated about. Why can't they? She's
talking about people running academy trusts and that kind of thing.
She's talking about those people who are responsible for the school buildings.
Because in the end, after all, your department is responsible for the capital budget.
We are responsible for the capital budget. Responsible bodies are responsible for the schools. But because this is such a serious issue, from 28 onwards, we have been very proactive in dealing with those responsible bodies.
So she is blaming the managers of groups of schools for not getting onto the problem earlier on.
A small minority who have not responded with their questionnaires. And, let's use this opportunity, Andrew, to say, look, please, if you haven't returned your questionnaire, for goodness sakes, return it by the end of the week.
And so you think, as it were, despite the fact that people have known about this for a long time, and you mentioned when you came back into the job, but according to our callers, schools were contacting the department back in March, April about this problem, and nothing came back from the department. You still think that all ministers have behaved properly about this?
Absolutely. We've been taking a very proactive, very cautious approach, particularly the Minister in the House of Lords, Diana Barron. She has been superb and brilliant in pushing this issue. We sent questionnaires in March 2022 to all responsible bodies, and we've been chasing response. Most came back pretty swiftly. We've been chasing those that have been a bit slow, and now we've got 95% return.
So if we take a knife and excise the offensive words, you would agree with what Gillian Keegan said today, that you collectively have done a very good job and everybody else has been sitting around on their backsides.
This was a private comment. She thought
private comment made in front of a live camera.
Yeah, well, she didn't know it was live, and she does regret the use of language and saying that thing. But what she was basically saying is that the civil servants in the department have really worked hard in identifying RAC, sending our engineers out to identify this new evidence, making a really big decision over the summer, and then rolling out the consequence of that decision.
And so finally, Nick Gibb, when are we going to know which schools are affected?
We will be publishing a list this week.
It'll be this week?
Absolutely this week. But the reason why we've not done it so far is we just need to make sure that the schools involved, the 156 schools, have had a chance to ring up their parents, to contact their parents, and also to put in place the mitigations that will...
Well, are you clear that for children in the schools that are affected, there will be alternative accommodation where they can be taught? Or are we not going back to homeschooling for all of them?
No. There may be one or two instances where for a few days there's some homeschooling while they put in place the mitigations to make the schools safe, or bring in or find alternative accommodation. But we want to keep that period to absolute minimum.
And just to be absolutely clear, when you say mitigations, are we talking about hiring hotels or using council buildings to teach children while their schools are being knocked down and rebuilt?
It could be propping. So we've got arrangements with companies that put up propping in schools. It could be finding alternative accommodation, maybe sharing with another school, moving the configuration of the existing school, or indeed bringing in porta cabins. And we have arrangements with porta cabin providers as well.
And roughly how many children are going to be involved in those kind of mitigations?
That's difficult to say because we know the number of schools, but sometimes the rack is only in one or two rooms. In some it might be the sports hall. In a few cases, it might be the whole school. So it will depend on how...
It sounds like thousands, at any rate, who will be in porta cabins or alternative accommodation of some kind.
It might be, but they will be in school, in face-to-face education. These porta cabins are, not the porta cabins we remember from our youth. They're much higher quality than they used to be.
I was taught in porta cabins. I learned absolutely nothing, but that was not because of the porta cabins. Nick Gibb, thank you very much indeed.